The original Sheik set the wrestling world, his opponents, his own promotion, and even himself on fire because he believed in the image that he had created, and he believed in the sport of professional wrestling, and he left a trail of blood, broken bones, and bombastic brutality across multiple shows at the Kobo Hall, in Toronto as well, in Japan. That man bled buckets across multiple continents, across multiple decades. He cultivated this image, never decided to break kayfabe. He was a tremendous family man. He made millions. He spent millions, and he just didn't know when to pull back. So he was in his 60s, still trying to be the man that he had built the image of being this iconic, insane individual. Ed Farhat, aka the original Sheik, was truly one of a kind. The man that popularized, innovated hardcore wrestling as it was and as it still is. This man left one hell of a goddamn broken, bloody legacy. I'm John Renton with my review of Dark Side of the Ring, Blood, Fire, and the original Sheik. So, truly one of a kind. Ironic, because he ended up training RVD. This was one hell of an episode. They couldn't dive into everything about the original Sheik, but I think they did a good enough job talking about how big of a star he was, and just unfortunately how big time wrestling would eventually kind of meet its untimely demise. And one thing I did love is I saw some pictures in this I had never seen before, some footage. It was just great to see the black and white footage from Chicago, the big time wrestling footage. There are some select episodes of big time wrestling on YouTube, by the way. I encourage you guys to check that stuff out. But this was really, really cool to see. Now, obviously, as you guys know, if you're a long-time subscriber or even a, mild-time subscriber to this channel, you know I'm not a big fan of hardcore wrestling, the blood and guts stuff. But the Sheik made it work. Now, he ended up having to call himself the original Sheik because you had the Iron Sheik, you had Sheik Adnan El-Casey, you had stuff like that, but he was the man to do it. Now, Jim Cornette, yes, I do listen to Jim Cornette's show, just want to say that right there. He was a great talking head here. So was Sabu. Rest in peace, Sabu. It's really sad that he wasn't able to see this episode air, but they got footage in the can. I don't know if they got enough footage to maybe do their own Dark Side of the Ring on Sabu, should they decide to do it. I could do more of a video on, the end of Sabu if I really wanted to, but I did do a tribute to him. You had RVD here, Dory Funk Jr., you had Jim Friedman, who was an author, and Abdul the Butcher, who had worked with Sheik, at the Kobo. And he would always keep kayfabe. He would always make sure that he was dressed to the nines. Cornette talked about, the show in 1988 at the Kobo Arena, riding a limo, all dressed up, while the show was going on, but people were paying attention. Now, he did, I believe, work a show. I don't remember if it was the Great American Bash Tour or right after the Great American Bash Tour, but he actually did end up, I believe, teaming with Dusty Rhodes, if I remember right, and that's when he was really, he was pretty much just toast at that point, physically. He was totally beat up. He was born in the 1920s, so, he's still wrestling sporadically in 88. So it's just insane. But I did like hearing from Sabu. It was nice he got to talk so glowingly about his uncle that he felt was much more of a father than his father ever was. It's very touching at the end how Sabu felt. RVD had some good insight here as well. He was Ed Farhat at first. He was just, he was a really good talent. But he was just a regular guy, just doing, wearing, dark tights and having, he was, like the ethnicity aspect would lend to his, would lend to him growing this Sheik image. They show some footage or pictures and a little bit of footage of other foreign heels. The Great Togo, you had Volga Boatman and Alibaba. Joyce was his wife, but also was Princess Salima. She was his corner woman, shall we say, and he abused her. Obviously in a working way, because you could tell that he loved her, and she lived a number of years after him because he died in 2003, I believe, and that's an incredible long marriage. And much respect to both of them. So it was nice to hear from the grandkids. There was Ed, there was Jen, there was Kelly, and I believe Susan, if I remember right. If there was another one, I do apologize. It was nice to hear from the kids. Jen, in particular, I think was the star of this. She got to weigh in the most because she was the oldest granddaughter. Abdul the Butcher weighs in. It's always funny to hear him talk. No wonder he didn't talk, because he's not intimidating when he talks. We saw Bruiser Brody footage because he worked in Detroit as well. That was pretty nice. And then they talk about the fireball, the flash paper and the lighter trick where, Jerry the King Lawler did that. Other people would end up doing that. Hulk Hogan would melt off his own eyebrows at Halloween Havoc 98. Yes, that actually happened for those of you that are newer fans. Google Halloween Havoc 98, or actually YouTube Halloween Havoc 1998, if you want to see one of the biggest train wrecks of an event. From WCW, it's still pretty hot, to the point that Diamond Dallas Page and Bill Goldberg had to be shown in full on Nitro the next night because they ran over time. Other talents would make sure that they didn't run over time, but you know who wouldn't? Show headlined by Bill Goldberg. I kid, of course. So, Bull Curry is somebody that Jim Cornette and the great Brian Last have talked about on his shows, Drive-Thru Experience, where he talked about, how he was pretty violent and everything. I didn't realize Bull Curry had giant eyebrows, as you could see from space, but nevertheless. Sheik was the one that really popularized hardcore, just took it to a new stratosphere. Also, you have to think when Bull Curry was doing this, and even with the advent of television, even him still being able to wrestle, when he was doing that, obviously people weren't going to be able to see it en masse. When the Sheik came along, was at Farhad, and then started cultivating the Sheik gimmick, that's exactly when things were taken off. He had, they didn't have Captain Ed George on this, oddly enough. More on that at a later date. Actually, it just has to do with a story that Terry Funk had told about him and Dory were having a feud with the Sheik, and I forget who the fuck else would. It might have been Abdullah, I don't remember. But they got the Kobo back up. It was like 78, 79. And everything was going good. They were going to get a big payoff. And then suddenly, somebody robbed the box office. Well, that's what they said. Terry Funk. Bless Terry Funk. You can't help but do a Terry Funk impression. Terry Funk, unfortunately, was not part of this because he passed away a couple years ago. But Dave Brzezinski was, wrestling manager. That's a name that especially those in Detroit will know. I believe he was part of, some piece, that was for YouTube that was about big time wrestling memories. I believe he was one of the guys. And Sheik decides he lied about his age to get into the army. He would do boxing, then he would get out of it, and then he would teach himself how to do electrical work because he knew how to do that, because I guess you could just lie to get into the army. I don't know why you would do that, but whatever. And he met Bert Ruby, who's a name that I've heard when they've done guest the program on the Cornette podcast. And also I do know that he had something to do with the Midwest, I believe Michigan specifically. He was a promoter and a manager, and they got along pretty well. He did end up helping, he helped train Ed. And, he would be Sheik out in, public. He would be dressed to the nines, all that stuff. If people he would speak normally around people that he trusted, but if they're at a restaurant, then if anybody would come by, they would see something, he would start speaking Arabic. He would just go full back into Sheik. And, the thing is, he wanted to stay at the top heel so he would never get beat. He would never get beat at all. He would actually, take it to fans like he did, the Z thing, that kind of stuff, just slice people. He would do that. I think he had, knives on bloody fingers. No, he would, do that. He would, have a way to protect himself. He would have blades on his, fingers, or he would just have them hidden where he could, do that. Because people would legit try to go at him because that's how much he had. He had, that much angry heat. So, In Amarillo, a fan apparently pulled a gun. Cornette was telling this, and the cops ended up stopping him because the gun had jammed. Well, then the man fired, or the cop fired the gun, and the bullet came out. So had it not jammed, he would have killed the Sheik. He would have either killed the Sheik or at least would have shot him. He bought Big Time Wrestling. They did mention he bought it from Jim Barnett in 1964 because Bruiser and Snyder, Dick the Bruiser and Wilbur Snyder. Dick the Bruiser actually was the name of a wrestling personality, folks. Wilbur Snyder, very Midwest name, Wilbur. That'll do, pig. That'll do. Wait, that was Charlotte's Web. Whole point is that was like something that Barnett had cultivated. And Jim Barnett, that's a big old subject, one of the most influential men in the history of professional wrestling. He would actually start the original World Championship Wrestling in Australia. That's actually why he left. And Sheik paid Barnett the installments. Dick the Bruiser and Snyder never did. Well, at least Bruiser never did. I mean, Snyder might have actually been willing to do it. Whole point is, he bought Big Time Wrestling in 1964. Now, he had cultivated the Sheik gimmick, had done some good stuff. And, Joyce ran the business, and Joyce, was really, really good and really smart about that. And I mean, it's a shame she's not here anymore, but she died a number of years ago as well. And then they had Kelly talked about the mother. Kelly's one of the other granddaughters. She talked a little bit. Jenny, do we have to say, was one of the pretty much the highlight of the talking heads here. Cobo Arena sold out a lot. He would outdraw the Pistons. He would outdraw, concerts and stuff like that. I think it was like 12,500, 13,000. It's actually the same arena where WCW had Halloween Havoc 1994. That was Mr. T as a special guest referee in a cage match between Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan, where Brother Brudai had butchered the friendship. They decided to have Brutus fucking Beefcake be a goddamn main event talent. No wonder WCW went in the goddamn shitter for a while after Hogan got there. And then 1995, of course, and more on that here in a bit because Sheik was on that show. But yes, the same show where they had the Giant fall off of the top of the Cobo Arena and the monster truck thing and then come back and then he beat Hogan and then the Yeti as a mummy showed up and they DP'd Hogan. 1995 wrestling, ladies and gentlemen. Giant and Hogan, check that out from Halloween Havoc 1995. If you want to see one of the worst pay-per-views of all time, at least in WCW history. So he did buy a mobile TV truck early on to film his matches, and also it was a way to get the message out there and everything and fill the TV time. And hey, they wouldn't maybe show the whole thing, but this would be a way to build his character, do all this. And, stars like Terry Funk, Mark Lewin, Bobo Brazil. Bobo Brazil, it was nice to see him get some love here as one of the pioneers of African American wrestling. I'm not saying he wasn't the first. There was Sailor Art Thomas. There was Jim Mitchell, the Black Panther. There were others. I'm sorry, I can't think. It's late. I used to be able to think of like more stuff. But anyway, he would make a whole lot of money. Well, Bobo would too, but Sheik made a whole lot of money. And the thing is, as Cornette talked about, and I'm not even going to get into like the thing about promoters ripping off wrestlers. Because trust me, Sheik wasn't the only one doing it, but skimming some money off, it's all in cash. You could skim some stuff off. He reported $400K in taxes. That's what he reported. That'd be over $2 million today. And he spent like crazy. They had a couple big houses. There was like his one house, the house the Sheik built. It was like this big mansion. It had like 35 rooms. I don't care if you are in your prime. You do not need a house with 35 rooms. That's fucking ridiculous. He owned a lot of suits. He would actually go, if I remember right, it would either do a shot for Roy Shire or do a shot in the Olympic Auditorium. And he would go on to this strip mall area where he actually would buy suits. I don't remember the name of the place, but I know I heard about that on the Cornette podcast. But he gambled a lot of his money too. And not that he was the only person that gambled. They talk about Flair gambling like crazy, losing 1,000 or 2,000 and not caring. But he didn't know when to quit. See, because in 1967, and that's backtracking a little bit because when you're a heel that never gets beaten, people stop coming. But before that, you had the Detroit City riots, where let's just say the police overextended their authority and were targeting African American people. I know. Geez, how surprising. But anyway, racial tensions were pretty high. Just bullshit. We should actually appreciate everybody regardless of skin tone. We should just look at who they voted for. But that being said, they talked about how crowds are segregated, especially in the South, during one show, and I don't remember. This must have been for Nick Goulas. I don't remember if this was, because he did work for Nick Goulas quite a bit. But there was like chicken wire to like block off the black fans, so they were like just in these areas, and he would go and like rip the wire down. Now, I don't know if he actually did that, but I wouldn't be surprised if he did, because he didn't give a fuck. But integrated audiences, like that's what we need. That's what wrestling needed well before that. But no, they're different skin tones. We have to be racist, apparently. I say as a white person because it's stupid. But to ease racial tensions, or at least give the city some hope, Bobo ends up beating the Sheik. Now, people pop. Granted, Sheik won the U.S. title a couple weeks later, but it was some big deal where it's like, okay, it meant something. And, I mean, I don't know if it healed the city of Detroit like they were saying, but maybe it helped the wrestling fans get some hope. I don't know if it... Maybe it did help. Maybe it solved everything. Maybe racism never existed in Detroit again. It's just the way they said it was a little weird. But then after 1975, the Detroit auto industry and businesses in general were starting to falter. Promotion was suffering. Bruno Sammartino showed up and did a spot for Sheik, but didn't get the money he was promised. It was an $800 check instead of $2,000, so he told, I believe, Dave Brzezinski, not coming back. And in late 1980, they lost to Kobo. They would still run shows here and there, like Bruiser was running shows, even for the WWA or whatever he was calling it at that point. But they were not doing all that well. Sheik was not doing all that well. And this is before Vince McMahon's expansion. It's just territories were aging out. They were using too many older people. They weren't elevating enough people in the Sheik. Yeah, you want to be the top star, but when you are on top of a mountain that just has nobody around you, like, are you really the king of anything? So then Giant Baba started bringing him over and everything. And I believe he had made appearances in Japan before anyway, because he had made appearances in Texas. He had made appearances all over. He was taking more out dates as his promotion was faltering. And he bled buckets and things were working well, but after a few years, Baba stopped bringing him over because the novelty was wearing off. So then he had to work smaller shows, working against Bobo, and that's not really going all that well. Because Bobo at that point he had to have been near 60. And bless Bobo Brazil. But, he was worn down. They talked about how he had a couple hip surgeries. They were having money issues. Had to sell one of the houses at one point. He trained Sabu. He helped train Sabu after we got a sidebar of like Sabu's dad being very abusive and Sheik basically beating up his dad. Like, how dare you do that? And Sabu basically wasn't sure he wanted to get into wrestling, but then after he got shot during a fight in a bar where the way he described the bullet went in his nasal cavity or whatever the fuck it went. The way he described it was really weird. But, ouch. And he was in the hospital, and then he decided he wanted to be a wrestler, and Sheik's like, okay, yeah, come on here. You're going to stay here for a year, you're going to chop wood, you're going to wash my car, you're going to do all this stuff, and you're going to set the ring up and break it down, and you're never going to get in the ring, or at least you're not going to get in the ring for another number of months. Weird training, but okay. And then he trained RVD, because RVD, I think it was like late 88, 89, he said he met Sabu. And things, were not going swimmingly, shall we say, because Sheik was like, freaking out, doing all the crazy stuff that he was still doing. And RVD talked about how it was tough, but they formed a bond and everything, and he knew that Sheik was just testing him. And then the time in FMW in the Ring of Fire death match. That was talked about on the Onita FMW Dark Side. But they had a practice run, and Jen, I actually thought, had a pretty good way of describing this, where it's like, it would have worked great, but just winds and stuff like that changed. The winds have changed, and so these kerosene-soaked rags and the flames are blowing around like crazy, so you get breath in the middle, kinda, except it was melting the logo in the middle of the ring. And yeah, things were not going well. It was in a baseball stadium, or at least a stadium of some variety, but it was not going well. And Sheik, by the way, he finally got out, but he had like skipped. His skin was melting. Sabu throws some water on him. And Sheik's upset because he still wants to do the fireball. Because he's still in the goddamn mindset where, okay, the show must go on. I think the fans wouldn't have cared if you hadn't thrown the fireball. And the one thing they forgot about is he went, I think, into a coma for a little bit. They talked about how he flew home, with the burns on his body. He still wrestled. I believe he still wrestled on that tour. Or if not, he went home, he got, treated, and then went back for the rest of the tour. But I believe he finished the whole damn thing, or at least he went back for FMW for a bit. I might be conflating the stories. But, yeah, something's wrong, is what, he didn't know Onita spoke English. So something's wrong, you think. So, Joyce took care of him. And then they kind of gloss over Sabu's run in WCW. It didn't last very long. He wrestled Mr. JL. It was Jerry Lynn in a weird Power Rangers outfit. And he did a moonsault. And Sheik was out there, by the way, with the freaking scimitar, or whatever the hell they call it. A saber. Like he's Tiger Ali Singh or something. That's another story for another day, folks. But Sabu does the moonsault. Sheik ends up breaking his leg. Because he's 69 years old and he's stumbling around out there. He's arthritic. He's not doing well. And he still threw the fireball and you could tell that he was fucked, but he was also no-selling the thing because it's whatever. And then he decided finally that, it's probably a good idea to stop. Yeah, I think so. So he focused on family. It was nice to hear from the grandkids about that, but then his health started to falter, and he died in 2003. Sabu was in the air flying to Japan. I believe Bill Goldberg was there and said, "Hey, by the way, your uncle died." I have a problem with this. I think this might have been before he went to WWE, because otherwise, if it was like after March of 2003, then the time doesn't line up. But anyway, Bill Goldberg basically tells him, "Hey, we heard your uncle passed." Sabu was like, "Well, I barely know you." And it's like, well, if we just heard that. And Sabu had to go out there and wrestle in the Tokyo Dome and do his stuff. And, the words were, he would want you to do your job. And it was Hall of Fame induction. Sabu is very emotional, that kind of stuff. So it was cathartic, but also a little eerie that Sabu's last words were, about his dead uncle. At least they got this episode filmed before he unfortunately passed away. The Sheik's legacy is definitely one of hanging on too long, but it's definitely one that was memorable and a lot of incredible highs. He made a whole lot of money. If only he had been a little bit smarter and spent that money, he might have been able to have a second life, possibly as a manager. But the problem is, he didn't know when to back off. Next week, however, is going to be tough because it is the Scream Queen Daphne. And I have a feeling that I am not going to be handling that well. Because I didn't handle her death all that well. Because the timeline, I remember specifically, a lot of fans worried, a lot of colleagues worried, and it was tough. So it's going to be tough. But the Sheik, what are your memories of the Sheik? How old are y'all? Do you remember the Sheik at all? Because I'm 44. I mean, I did not get to see the Sheik in his prime. So agree, disagree what I said, like, share, subscribe, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky handles in the description. I'm John Rethlin, and I'll see you soon.